Welcome to Dubai Real Estate Unplugged, where we strip away the hype to reveal the forces driving one of the world's most fascinating property markets, Dubai. I'm Luke Remington, Managing Director at House & House, and today we're gazing into 2025. Dubai's property scene has been phenomenal. It's been shattering sales volume records, and it's been commanding unprecedented prices in the luxury segment. It's been witnessing a renaissance in off-plan developments. But what story will the next chapter tell? To help us navigate the road ahead, I'm joined by two industry legends, or veterans, who've helped shape Dubai's real estate landscape. Simon Baker, my fellow House & House co-founder, brings his seasoned perspective from decades in the market, where he's mastered the art of spotting emerging trends before they hit the mainstream. And alongside us is Charlie Bannan, whose journey through the business from leasing sale has earned him a position as Managing Director at House & House. Get ready for an unfiltered discussion about what's next in residential sales, the shift in dynamics in leasing, and the future off-plan investments. Whether you're a seasoned investor, a property owner, or you're simply dreaming of calling Dubai home, this episode will arm you with insights you need to make an informed decision in 2025 and beyond. Let's get into it. I think I say this on quite a few podcasts, gentlemen, but and I know we're in the aim of selling properties and we're House & House. And I don't want to be controversial if we don't need to be, but at the same time, I don't want us to be typical salespeople trying to promote the business or sell things. I want honesty, and and there's a lot of people at the moment, Charlie, that are probably going on to ChatGPT and trying to forecast the market or trying to get a AI bot to give them the truth because maybe they don't believe real estate agents. But 2025, I can imagine there's quite a few people that have typed in, is it now a good time to buy? Have I missed the boat? These seem to be questions on most people's lips or words coming out their mouths at dinner parties. But what factors are driving the continued growth? Because we have seen continued growth probably last 4 years. I read that we're 60% up in the last 4 years. We've heard some big numbers talked about in our directors meeting this morning. So what's driving this continued growth, and how do you see this playing out in 2025?
More and more people still wanting to move to Dubai and create a life, whether that be someone single in their 20s, or whether that be a family of four who have lived in London their whole entire life or any other part of the world. That's a very simple way to understand why the prices are going up, because it puts demand on the current properties that are handed over. But I suppose Simon was speaking well earlier around all of the stuff that's being sold aggressively over the last 2 years from an off-plan perspective is yet to hit the market. And for 2025 specifically, I don't think much is going to change in regards to new communities handing over that are really going to dent supply versus demand. But I suppose looking further afield, I think you probably need to this year more than ever be a little bit more strategic around what you invest in when it comes to real estate in Dubai. Whereas I think for the past 2-3 years, it could have been anything, anywhere, and you're going to do quite well if you're looking at it from quite a short-term perspective. But I think even looking at things from a short-term perspective now, you probably have to be quite savvy.
Do you not feel, let's go back to your summit, do you not think people had to be strategic? Charlie's words.
I think it always helps to look at the numbers and to really consider which communities are most likely to appreciate over time. I mean, obviously, we mentioned this morning's meeting, there were only 29,000 units actually handed over in 2024. Which is interesting. So it kind of tells you that on an average to date, there's been about 4.5 people per unit for the Dubai ready market for residential. So that kind of tells me that, last year we had a population increase of just under 150,000 people and only 29,000 units come to the market. So if you do the maths on that, times it by about 4, you need about 120,000 people to take up that supply last year. And of course, we've had more people, which has meant that upward demand on property and the upward price appreciation has continued. Until we see significant increase of handover of units, that will continue. So certainly this year, more units are predicted to be handed over. However, the reality is that sometimes these properties do get a bit delayed. So there's no doubt that some of those handovers projected for 2025 may well push into 26. So we see very positively that the Dubai market will probably increase this year. The exact percentage obviously is going to be hard to predict, but I would say maybe somewhere between, if I had to make a prediction right now, I'd say somewhere between 10 and 15% price growth I think we can see this year on average. So which is very, very positive in the short run. A bit more longer term, we're going to have to look at the demand, which has been very, very strong, and then obviously combined with the supply and work out where that takes us for the future.
How responsible is the off-plan market to the whole growth of what's going on? It plays a large part, right?
It's a huge part, yeah. I mean, obviously last year, I think 61% was the final number. 61% of the market was off-plan, which is huge. Going forward, I mean, look, Dubai's been built on off-plan property, right? So in the last 20 years since I've been here, the population's almost quadrupled, which is crazy, So what major city in the world can say that 20 years ago they had 1 million people? Today, I think the official number is about 3.9 million. So population growth has been huge, and obviously the demand for property, for both rentals and sales has obviously been as large, So, and I think until the supply can catch up with that, we're going to continue to see price appreciation.
And Charlie, why are we seeing the population's got a large part to do with it. The amount of properties being built's got a large part to do with it. Why are people still getting on the plane? You're on the, you're sitting with the teams and they're doing viewing numbers. I think we talked about this earlier, viewing numbers, the amount of buyers being registered in the company, 2024. We're only, at the time of recording this, 26, 27 days into January, but we've already registered significantly more buyers in January this year compared to January last year. Yeah. So if we continue on that growth, without being biased because we live here, why are people coming here?
So I've spoken to two people who I know through friends in the UK that obviously understand that Charlie's in Dubai Real Estate, speak to him. And the first one that I sat down with and spoke to, I assumed, wrongfully so, that when I met them, they was going to look for maybe an investment between 1 and 3 million dirhams, get a better rental return than what they would in the UK. When I sat down with them, they were actually looking to spend just over £2 million. But they have no plans to relocate to Dubai. They've got a successful business in London. They just simply want to take their money away from the UK and put it into Dubai because of the uplift on capital appreciation and the rental returns once it's handed over. So that was really interesting for me. And I pushed them and said, oh, when are you going to move over? Like, couldn't you move the business over here? And they were just like, no, we've got no intention of moving to Dubai. However, we do really want to start aggressively placing some investment money into Dubai as opposed to us just relocating. Mm-hmm. Then on the flip side, I suppose another person who's looking to spend circa £3 million on a home for him and his family. And he's wanted to do it for the last 3 or 4 years, but his wife has just simply said, no, we're not doing it. Mm-hmm. But now, since one of their children is about to finish GCSEs, they're open to the prospect of moving, and they're coming over in 2 months' time to circle the communities, get a feel for it, and hopefully move over towards the back end of this year.
So it's not just people that are looking to move over here. We've got people that maybe have got money tied up in a bank and concerned about the interest maybe they're building up, or want to get a bit of Dubai.
Well, I just think that if you look at the rental returns, blanket speaking, you can probably quite easily achieve 5%, if not 7-8%.
Yeah.
Compare that to other cities in the world, it's incredibly high. So that's attractive whether you want to live here or not. In terms of getting your money working harder for you, it's a prosperous thing to do.
Dubai's always offered very, very strong rental returns, hasn't it? I think the average gross rental return for last year was 6.8%, which is, when you compare to many places, not just the UK, obviously we're a bit biased towards the UK, but lots of major cities, that's huge, isn't it? That's a huge rental return.
Touching on that, Simon, I saw a billboard, you've probably seen it because it's on our drive home, 10% ROI. What do you say to this?
There are a few. I mean, there's a few, certainly smaller developers at the moment advertising, and you have to be a little bit careful. Like, you don't want to be, the reality is that some of these developers may well be pricing a return into the purchase price.
And how would they do that for the
Well, I'll give you an example.
novice?
So let's say that historically, and it has happened not just in Dubai, all over the world, someone might say, buy this property for, let's say, 1 million dirhams, and we'll give you 10% for 3 years. It's usually a fairly short period of time. Now, arguably, if the property was overpriced by, say, 10 or 15%, all they've done is subsidise the difference between the actual return, which is 6.8%, and the 10%, if that makes sense. So it's very easy to dress these things up. And again, it's quite easy for potential buyers, if they're not that well versed in the market or they haven't done their homework, to potentially be a little bit bamboozled by these offers. And they need to speak to someone who really understands what's going on the ground to make sure they get the right advice, really.
This is where my comment at the beginning of the podcast was, where you need to be a little bit more strategic. I think that everyone's gotten away with a lot because the market's just been so buoyant. But I think as the supply slowly starts to come in, it will really create divides across what communities are doing well, what properties are doing well, as opposed to invest in Dubai, you'll make money no matter where you look, because that is definitely the message that's sent from a lot of agents, a lot of agencies, and developer direct marketing.
I mean, certainly if you look at our recent market reports, it tends to be a lot of the villa communities, doesn't it, that have led the way.
Master developers.
But the best master developers, you like to be Emar, that build really, integrated communities that have done very, very well. So I think you have to be careful. And when you look at supply, we talk about supply as a general thing, but the fact is that 87% of the ready market is apartments, and I think last year as much as 89% of apartments were sold off plan. So then when you look at, where could we look at a niche segment of the market? Certainly villa communities, independent villas only made up just over 1% of the new off-plan supply last year, which is a really, really small number. So again, trying to identify not just a segment, but also a community within that segment that really works is probably quite prudent, really.
Definitely.
There's lots of ways to slice the cake, Simon, but there's lots of podcasts I listen to, and there's lots of commentators out there, and some have been, I think the thing that I'd like to dwell on here for a bit is, obviously you have got decades of experience between you guys. There seems to be a lot of difference in numbers. Who was right? Who was wrong?
I mean, data's king, isn't it? But the reality is that, some of these platforms do seem to share quite different data. We try to be as impartial as possible as a company, and we only really work with Property Monitor. Now, they're completely independent. They haven't got I would say, any bias towards, trying to dress up the market, if you like. So we work with them in their figures, and that's how we look at, the ready market being 5% villas and 8% townhouses. Certainly, there's a much smaller number of units there, and obviously, I think as the demographic, Charlie touched on it earlier, but as the demographic towards more families, more end users moving here for the long run, those properties would seem like the sort of safest segment of the market to invest in, really. So,
Okay, so Simon's saying 10 to 15% growth. We'll review this again in January 2026 and see whether he's right or wrong. Charlie, what are you saying?
Yeah, I think if you're looking at master developed communities like villas, I think you're going to be close to 15.
Okay.
But I think I wouldn't be surprised if there was some real estate in Dubai that only grew by like 6%, because as people start to think more logically about where they put their money.
Okay. Right. So growth. Anyway, that's what we're talking. You're both talking growth, which is good news. But of those communities, you've talked about the master developers. What communities do you think are primed for significant growth? If we're going up to that kind of 10, 15, and people want something that's going to have that significant growth, because usually that's what they're looking at as well. So I feel you can have a family, and they can, they might like one development more than the other. But if the agent says, well, you get more growth here than you will there, well, it doesn't matter. That seems to be a key factor in it.
I think, so if you're looking at off-plan properties to purchase in terms of villas, it's got to be your likes of Emar Oasis and the Acres. And Simon can definitely speak to those two communities better than I, but I think the opportunity really lies in somewhere like Oasis, is that not everyone can afford to go and buy an Oasis. So I think that's what makes the opportunity quite unique. And if you look at it from a price per square foot perspective now versus if it was handed over, it's considerably cheap. So I think something that's really interesting in terms of what's handing over, and I think people will be speaking about a lot more by the end of this year, is probably areas like Peninsula and Business Bay. Now, whilst we've been speaking about it for the last 3 years when it comes to selling them off plan and reselling them, I think a lot of the general public in Dubai wouldn't necessarily know what Peninsula is. But by the end of this year, I think it'll be a community on the tip of everyone's tongue, because if you go down there, which we did recently, the community is great. The buildings are really spaced out between each other. There's lots of properties that look straight onto the water. It's real water. It's not stagnant. It reminded me a bit like of Canary Wharf standing out looking at that. It's very, very nice. And I think that by the end of this year, anyone that's got property in Peninsula will be smiling from a price per square foot perspective.
100%. Simon, I'm going to throw commercial at you. I know it's not probably your forte, but I think wrongly, and I'll hold my hands up, I think looking after that COVID period, I felt that it was the death of the office, because everyone started to work from home and shout from the rooftops and sit at home and have late
and
coffees.
Hopefully that seems to have all changed a lot.
Well, it does, doesn't it? And we can certainly see that with the commercial numbers that are coming through at the moment.
And commercial rents have gone up a lot, haven't they? Went from being able to take your pick of prime commercial spaces to now really, really struggling. So I think obviously with the population increase as well, obviously these people now, we are all back to work. They need to work from somewhere, and big companies moving here are going to need grade A commercial space in prime locations for their company to have a real hub in Dubai. And I think that certainly the last few years, the developers have really focused on probably the luxury segment of the market, prime residential, and they haven't necessarily focused on that office space. So I think there's an opportunity there for sure. I think there's been very, very few new launches and new off-plan sales for commercial space, and I think that could well be a very, very good investment in the next few years. I think be very bullish on the commercial space, despite not knowing the exact numbers to back it up.
Are you going to top 15% on commercial?
I mean, I think it kind of, again, like everything, it depends on what price you buy it for. As they say, you make your profit when you buy something, not when you sell it. So a bit like Charlie mentioned Acres and Oasis, they're two developments we've really pinpointed that are probably undervalued. They're communities that we like to try and find developments off plan, essentially, that will appreciate even if the market doesn't appreciate, and I think that's really important. So an Oasis, as Charlie also mentioned, you need a huge amount of cash. With a sort of 80-20 payment plan from EMI, you need a lot of money up front. But if you are in a position to be able to fund that payment plan, even if the market was to stay completely level and at the same price it is today, we can see sort of 50-60% appreciation in that particular community. So there's an awful lot of opportunity for growth. As an opportunity rather than just a wild speculation for what the market could do based on today's numbers.
If, Simon, on those communities, if you saw a 50-60% growth on those other communities, would the listener be right in thinking that there's going to be 50-60% growth on other communities?
No, I think they're not all places are created equal. I think certain master communities, like your likes of EMAR and big government developers, are in a very powerful position to take a large piece of land and create a community that end users really want to live in. So obviously it's property, and we're talking about it as an investment, but ultimately if it was Luke and his family, you want to live somewhere nice in the future, don't you? So we need to establish, what's the next Dubai Hills. I mean, with Luke, we were selling Dubai Hills, in 2013.
Yeah.
People used to say, "Oh, why you're mad? Why are you buying there?" And I used to say, "Well, it's the last plot of land right in the centre of Dubai, being built by the biggest developer in Dubai, with a proven track record for building communities." And actually, I saw it as a no-brainer, And for exactly the same reason, someone like Oasis is going to be a luxury villa development. And currently, their villas being sold significantly lower per square foot than you could buy, an established community such as your Arabian Ranches or your Jumeirah Golf Estates or any of these ones. Yeah. So that's where the opportunity lies, really.
Charlie, landlords have been high-fiving one another, and it looks like they're going to continue to do so into 2025 as well, because of that supply. Any predictions you're seeing there? If you're a landlord, are you still very bullish and you're going to be kicking your tenants out and inflating your rent? There's a new rental index that's out. Or are tenants going to have a bit of leeway and they're going to be a bit happier than they probably were in 2024?
I think the plus points are more for the landlords than the tenants again this year. I can't see rents coming down. I can't see them stabilising. I can see them slowly creeping up. If anything, if a tenant leaves, it's a good thing for a landlord because they can probably re-rent at a higher price. There's a little bit more structure coming in around the rental index, which is very well welcomed because it gives a better opinion on what a property's worth within a community as opposed to just looking at the community as a whole. So I think DLD, well done. That's definitely going to help drive investor confidence. But I think another win for the landlords this year and tenants, maybe if you can consider buying.
Simon, you touched on those numbers earlier. So if we have got any tenants looking to come out to Dubai, you mentioned the amount of units that were to be handed over this year, and you mentioned the amount of population growth.
Okay, so isn't it population growth obviously remains to be seen, doesn't it? So this is why it's not an exact
let's go on previous. Let's go back on what we have seen, and
what we've seen in the last few years is anywhere between 30 and 40,000 units completing, and if that continues, then there's going to be no oversupply. I think this year Property Monitor had a number of around 72,000 units that were due for completion. As we all know in Dubai, the reality is that was the original date given by the developer, which is all they can go off. But it does mean that there is a good chance that maybe 20 to 30,000 of those units may well be delayed, and that's slip into 2026.
So you're saying also some slipping from 24 to 25,
of
right?
Course,
so
right. So there's a kind of sliding scale, probably. So there will be more units handover this year. Potentially, that could help the average tenant out. If there's more supply in the community or the segment of the market that you rent within, then that could help potentially at least stabilise prices, so that you don't see any more price appreciation there, which could be a good sign for tenants, certainly for the future. If not this year, but certainly into the next 2 to 3 years for sure.
So let's get this right. You're saying for over 70,000 plus units that are expected to be handed over this year, you believe there's going to be less than 50% of those actually?
I don't think we're not necessarily 50. I think maybe 40 to 45,000 would be quite a reasonable projection.
Okay.
What would that mean? As Charlie mentioned, a lot of those would then come in probably the first half of 26. So it would obviously mean that there was more of a surge in handovers in 2026, so that could be the moment where you would then, I mean, if anything, it's probably good for Dubai in the long run if prices do level off, both rentals and sales. Dubai's always grown very aggressively on the back of fairly reasonably priced real estate. We always compare to the rest of the world, and certainly Dubai average price is currently, I think it was level with Bristol or somewhere, which you didn't quite believe, Luke. But, but that's about the average price per square foot.
I can't understand how you can find that Bristol's got a higher price per square foot. I think it was one above us.
I think we were 57.
No, I think it was about 10 above us. I think that's the concern is, a lot of people don't know Bristol is yet.
But essentially, what does that tell us? Well, we've got so many people coming from London. I told a good story about a friend of mine moving from London with his family. And again, they probably never would have dreamt of coming to Dubai 10 years ago. Now the situation's changed. Politics in the UK, maybe safety, security being two very big reasons. And now they're moving here. And again, they're moving into a much more mature Dubai market. They're not coming how we came 15 or 20 years ago for a year or two. They're coming for a 10-year plan. They're swapping a house in London for a house here, which is still very good value for money. So for some of these people, it's still, depending on where you're from, it's still seen as quite good value for money. So it's interesting, isn't it? It depends where you're from as to whether it's Dubai could be seen as, oh, wow, it's very expensive. If you're coming from Yorkshire, for example, you might, back in the UK analogy, you would think it's very, very expensive. Whereas actually, if you're coming from central London, Dubai prices still seem quite reasonable, right?
Yeah, and what's it? Central London's got a population of 9 million or something, so it's got a fair amount. But if you look at the UK, I know it's probably not good to just keep talking about the UK, but because we know that best, other than Dubai, I suppose if you look at the average price and you look at the middle class, is Dubai affordable?
Well, I think the average price for anything inside the M25, I think it's around £1,600 a square foot. I think that's the exact number. So you're talking about 8,000 to 9,000 dirhams a square foot, as opposed to here, where your average of residential ready properties are like around 1,600 mark. So it's still considerably cheaper. I mean, it depends but again, it depends where you compare to, doesn't it? I mean, I'm from sort of a couple of hours outside London, but the average price there would be around £400 to £500, which is about, say, 2,000 dirham. So it's still more expensive than it is currently for the average price in Dubai. So
it's a very different landscape. You buy a house in any of the communities that we've mentioned so far, you're not just buying a house, like you're buying a house within a community, and there's parks and there's shops and there's loads of things for your kids to do, or there's loads of things for you to do, like restaurants, the shopping malls, like it's huge. You're not just buying a house on a street that everyone else is buying into. Like it is a fully fledged community with gyms and lots on your doorstep.
When you arrive into Dubai, Charlie, you see lots of developers it's like they're trying to grab you as you're collecting your suitcases and it's 3 o'clock in the morning, they're trying to sell your property and there's shiny electric boards everywhere promoting different property developments. That it is a sales centre, isn't it? Dubai is a sales centre. We're not just talking about the developers. Dubai is a sales centre. There's sales going on everywhere. Is it catching everyone? Are people getting concerned about all the sales and all the cranes out there that they were before? I think, Simon, we talked about, in a previous podcast, that there's too much being built. We're going to have an oversupply. Are there any concerns about this?
I think if you speak to 10 people, a few would say yes, there's a concern. A few would say there isn't. I think arguably, including us in this room, we don't actually know what's going to happen for sure in the future. But I think that's always been there. Like when you were talking about Dubai Hills Estate, then you guys sending it off plan. I came in 2016 and I remember Simon taking me to the sales centre and being like, look, here's what's going to be here. And I'd be lying if I didn't look at it and be like, this guy's a bit crazy. Like that is desert. And that's a model. Like you're kind of leading people up the garden path. But now having seen what Dubai Hills has done, and it's easier to believe it because you've seen it. And if I could rewind to 2017, 16, I would be able to sell the idea of what this can do for you financially or for you just a home to live in, just as Simon did, because he's seen it. So I think seeing is believing, and I think the longer you're here, the less concerns you come about trusting the government and what they're going to do, because when have they ever not really delivered? If they make a plan.
Saying that for the last 20 years, because of course, as that population's gone from that 1 million to 4 million, it's always been the case. Or they're building all these properties, who the hell's going to live in them? It's been quite a common question all the time, which you respect, right? Until you've seen the kind of growth that Dubai's been on with such visionary leadership from, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed all the way through the government, and until you see what they've put in place and the kind of the aggressive growth that's happened, then it's hard to believe, isn't it, really?
And they're connecting the city more now with like the metro lines, and I saw an article the other day about linking Abu Dhabi and Dubai within 30 minutes on a train. They're making it more of an accessible place to be. And it's quite small when it comes to a landscape, but the easier it is to move around, the freer people feel. And again, it's just going to attract more and more people to come here, and that's not from us paying tax for them to be able to do that. That is simply the city investing back into itself to make it a more attractive place for people to work, live and stay.
Are there any key things, Simon? They published the D33, the economic agenda. There's a lot of policies out there that are really, really interesting. Are there any key things out there that people could look at to think, well, I'm not just going to believe what Luke, Charlie and Simon say because I hear them say positive. I
think there is, the fact that for 2040, they've got a huge population target. It was originally 5.8 million. They've extended that to 7.8 million. So that's double what it is today. And if in fact we do double the population, then obviously the demand for property is going to be even greater. And I think the established communities that are in really good locations will see growth. The exact percentage of which is obviously very, very hard to predict.
Did I see so sales, the amount of sales transactions for 2024, am I right in thinking it was over about 450 billion?
It was about 522 billion, I think was the number. Now their economic agenda by 2033 is to do 1 trillion dirhams of transactions a year. So double what it is today. And I think Sheikh Mohammed's always had this vision, build it and they will come. Well, what does that mean? They are literally building a city very, very fast. And the fact that the property market in 20 years, or just over 20, about 22 years of freehold property here, has grown so fast is testament to that vision, really. Mm-hmm. Of course, there will be periods of oversupply. However, the demand has been so strong thanks to everything from golden visas and being able to come and work here and live with your family and have a safe life where you're not paying too much in tax, and all of these selling points for Dubai has brought more and more and more people here, and continues to. And I think obviously certainly at the moment you've got the flip side of it in Europe and many other places. People are seeing increase in crime and political instability, if anything, which is a bit ironic, really, considering they're coming here and it's all under the rulership of one person. But actually, when the vision is clear and they back that up with action, it's suddenly very, very powerful. So, exciting place to be at the moment.
Okay. I think that's it. Someone did ask me whether we're going to be replaced with AI and whether our jobs are safe. So whether we as real estate agents are going to be replaced by AI. Can someone go onto AI and can someone in 2025 say, tell me the 3 best developments to get the best ROI or the 3 best investments to get growth? Or what? When people are coming into the airport, they're seeing all these different hoardings, developers, etc. They've got the choice. They've got many choices. There was a new development launched every 17 hours, I think, in 2024. Should they be listening to AI? Should they be listening to that?
AI is very clever. I think, I went to a really interesting talk about AI, and the guy talking about it was from the US. He's created a very big business, which I won't mention the name of, but he basically said, like, look, if you're after information being dragged from the internet, it's probably better than 99.9% of human beings because it's considering all of the information it can source. Now, the talk was all about whether can AI actually start learning on its own, and I think they're not quite at that stage yet. When they are at that stage, then probably lots of jobs are potentially under risk. But for the time being, it's very, very good at taking information. Yes, it can tell you the rental returns of 100 different communities. Can it predict what the rental returns are going to be for your oasis in your acres? I'm not quite sure, and I do think there's a certain value to having an experienced broker to help you and to advise you as to whether what's gone on in the past and learning from that cognitive learning, if you like, where AI probably isn't at that stage yet. It's a very good information provider. If you want to do anything that sucks information off the internet, it's very, very clever. Can it in fact start learning yet? We're probably not at that stage. So I'm not sure it's going to replace all jobs in the next 6 to 12 months, but in the next 10 years, who knows? Possibly.
There's always going to need to be a human element to it. If you look at EMAR, the percentage of property that EMAR have personally handed over in Dubai is 80% of everything that's here, and they've still got some of the best sales centres and some of the nicest places to go and buy a house. If it was purely based on, well, you trust them, they've built the most and they've got a good reputation, they wouldn't have any sales offices. They just send out WhatsApps and AI call people, but they don't. They still make it an experience. They still make it a journey. Yeah. And I think people are always going to want that when it comes to property. I think the scariest thing for AI is that anyone could probably sound like they know what they're talking about, but then when you actually get through to that person, they might not. So I think it'll make it harder for a client, buyer, seller, landlord, tenant to get in touch with someone who can genuinely give good opinion or feedback on what's going on in the market today, because so many people will easily be able to portray that they know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. I think real estate is always going to be a physical asset, and I think the idea that, someone said before, you can buy an off-plan investment without meeting anyone. Yeah, you probably could, but actually, if you're going to buy a house that you want to potentially live in with your family, the idea of not going to see a house that you're going to spend 10 years living in, to me, just seems a bit backwards. So I think that, ultimately having someone that can show you around, show you all the benefits of all these different communities, if it's going to be a place you're going to live in with your family and your kids, then the idea of not going on a viewing just seems a bit short-sighted to me.
Yeah.
There's some good insights there. I think what we're trying to say is anywhere between 5 and 15% growth in the residential and off-plan sector. Tenants, you're probably going to maybe have a slightly easier ride, but it could be a bit of a roller coaster as well.
I think you'd probably stay put. Unless you really need to move, I would advise people to stay put where they are, to renew another year or so. And it's always hard to predict long term. Yes, we're going to look at supply numbers in the future. 2026 and into 2027, certainly a lot of, there's been a lot of off-plan, smaller units being sold. Studios and one-bedroom apartments, for example, make up a huge amount of that supply. So in that segment of the market, the rents may soften off a bit and, look into the future. And we have to keep a really close eye on that. And obviously, very, very important that people are speaking to their agents to really make sure that they are getting the right information in real time and up to date, really.
Charlie, A or B, would you buy or sell in 2025? I'm asking you honestly, would you buy or would you sell?
See, depends what you have.
I think it very much
really does depend. Simon spoke to lots of studios and one bedrooms coming, which they are, like factually they are.
Yeah.
But then you can break it all down. Like, how many of those studios and one bedrooms have got a really nice view, whether that be water or some sort of structure like the Burj Khalifa? Probably not many. So it's like everything can be dissected, so it's really hard to answer. But I think it's not a bad idea to consider selling something that you've had for a while, when all of these new apartment buildings and villa communities are coming up and they're making the community really, really strong, whether that just be your lobby and your gym. I think old real estate is probably worth getting a valuation on and making a plan for the future.
Simon, I'm going to ask you the same question.
Yeah, no, listen, I agree with Charlie to a degree. I mean, I think ultimately you need to look at what the property is. If it's appreciated significantly in the past,
which
it may well in more recent years, it may well be time to release some equity, move that property on and look at new opportunities. Certainly in Dubai, obviously, it's I wouldn't say all that glitters is gold, but certainly some of the newer communities when it comes to luxury. I think that what was considered luxury 10 years ago is probably very different to today. So I think if you were looking at luxury development today, the expectation on services, facilities, community is that much higher by end users that potentially you would be worth selling some of the older units, potentially holding some funds in reserve. Would I sell everything today? I think that would be a very bold move, but certainly releasing a bit of equity, putting a bit in the bank for a rainy day is never a bad idea, really. So yeah, I would think potentially a bit of both would be the answer, depending on what you've got and what it looks like.
I think with that answer, gentlemen, our jobs are safe, because if any listeners want to type in my question into ChatGPT, I don't think they will get that answer. So your expertise is powerful. We need to shoot off to the radio for 2025 predictions, which is happening in the next 30 minutes in our weekly slots. So that's exciting. And that wraps up another episode of Dubai Real Estate Unplugged. I'm incredibly grateful to Simon and Charlie for their candid insights into what promises to be another dynamic year for Dubai property. The message is clear. Whether you're looking at luxury apartments, commercial spaces, or off-plan opportunities, Dubai real estate landscape remains rich with potential in 2025. Remember, success in this market comes back down to having the right information and the right team by your side. If you're ready to make your move in Dubai real estate, the House & House team is here to transform your property aspirations into reality. I'm Luke Remington, and thank you for joining us on Dubai Real Estate Unplugged. Keep exploring, keep investing wisely, and join us next time as we continue to uncover the real stories driving Dubai property markets. Once again, thank you.